a second. Rupert, I feel like I should say at the outset to anybody watching this that has not seen the 6th season of Homeland, don't watch it until after you've seen the season. I want to start by asking, when you came into this season, did you know it was going to be the end of Peter Quinn?
No, not at all. You know, knowledge is a very drip-fed thing in the world of Homeland. You know, I think it's not dissimilar to real intelligence services where there's sort of need-to-know basis on a lot of classified information. And that's not because the writers are, you know, secretive or being obscure or something. It's because the writers deliberately write as they're going along. So we come to the season with sort of the first 4 or 5 scripts pretty much written, and then they're writing and playing catch up as we go along. So, and as it develops, I think they decide which storylines to explore and where to take the story based on, I think, what they've told me in part on what the actors are doing as much as what's going on in the real world. You know, if they see something that entices them in either of those worlds, they jump on it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, when you see the ending of of Peter Quinn, it seems like a natural conclusion for this character. Talk a bit about the physical and mental and emotional changes that he undergoes this season from last season.
Yeah, I mean, natural conclusion is a really interesting place to start because there is something in this guy, as we saw in the letter that he left for Carrie at the end of season 5. There's this idea of he's always felt a pull to darkness, that in some way he either made some kind of Faustian pact or isn't really well suited to kind of a Brady Bunch existence, and yet is fundamentally an incredibly decent human being. So the idea that he would finally come to rest in a darkness of his own making, and in so doing save lives, save a president-to-be, save a woman for whom he had feelings, is apt. Sorry, your other part of your question was about the changes, right?
That's right.
So, yeah, we had this very interesting and challenging opportunity to tell the true story of a modern veteran coming home from war, which has become a very complicated idea in modern times. You know, it's not just the First World War and those who came back from it, or the Korean War. With all of the clandestine operations that happen, you know, in today's world, there are wars being fought all the time on battlegrounds that we don't even hear about, and yet those soldiers, those who served, are still coming home to the same problems that their great-great-grandfathers did, namely a feeling of being unable to relate to anybody who hasn't lived through what they have, not least the psychological and physical impairments that we see in Peter Quinn and many of his peers and colleagues. And I think society, in a way, isn't really prepared to necessarily embrace their differences. And I think embracing people's differences is an incredibly evolved way to live. And that's what I found in my research, was that a sense of outsiderness was prevalent among many, many veterans. And that outsiderness, as we know, can be an incredibly special and powerful skill. I mean, look at someone like Temple Grandin, Dr. Temple Grandin. You know, her otherness is what enables her to be brilliant. So the idea of looking at her in any way as less than, or any of these people as less than, is deeply misguided.
I was going to ask if you could delve a bit more into the research that you did in order to play not just the physicality, but the mental state of this guy. Were there specific veterans you talked to, or books you read, or?
Yeah, there were a few, because this was a very kind of multifaceted research project for me, because there's the veteran element, and obviously I've never been to war, and I spoke to a number of people who are far younger than I, and have lived through things that I hope I will never have to live through, and struggle with the ramifications, the fallout of that on a daily basis. And there are plenty of excellent documentaries on conditions such as post-traumatic stress syndrome. Then there was the stroke element, which again I haven't ever suffered, but Jill Bolte Taylor wrote a superb book, My Stroke of Insight. It's a neuroscientist who was able to understand from a neurological point of view what was happening to her as she was going through a stroke. She gave a TED talk as well. She's an incredible a resource. I'm sure she's an amazing person. I've never met her, but My Beautiful Broken Brain was a very, very useful documentary made by, again, a very young woman who made a beautiful film about what she went through when she suffered a stroke at the age of something like 32. Very, very young. And then the medical community was very helpful. You know, I spoke with doctors and specialists who deal in chemical warfare victims. You know, how do you know what it's like to be gassed? What does that do to the body? So it was kind of a multi-pronged thing, full of really very traumatic research, which I think ultimately was also very kind of uplifting, because the common thread through all of these people was in the ability, not the disability. So I spoke to people from all of these different walks of life, and all of them were telling me about how they did things, not that they couldn't.
Right. I wanted to ask you about the relationship between you and Carrie in this show, because I mean, it really, a lot of your actions within this season are really dictated by your love for her. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think by this season, there's a feeling that Quinn recognizes that when he and Carrie are in the same world, things tend to kind of go quite badly wrong. And for me, there was a sense of distance that he was trying to put between he and her, and even being kind of exiled to this cottage that Dara Dahl sends him to with Astrid to look after him. It's in some ways, I think, a relief, because Carrie is so focused on, as Quinn says, the mission, the mission, the mission. And I think that Quinn's questioning the validity of the motivations behind that mission more and more.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of Dara Dahl, it's so fascinating watching you work with F. Murray Abraham, because you're always kind of the two minds of, you know, does this guy really care about my well-being, or is he just using me? Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, it's a desperate relationship. It reminds me of almost like a sort of Fagin relationship from Oliver Twist, you know, where you don't have a parental figure, so you kind of latch your horse onto the first kind of semblance of that. And I don't think Quinn's ever really allowed himself to be self-pitying or indulgent, but the notion that the closest thing he's ever had to a father figure is Dara Dahl, who ostensibly, if he didn't personally abuse Quinn, certainly sanctioned the abuse of Quinn as kind of a honey trap in some ways. But seeing that and feeling that craving for the love of a parent, the unconditional, supportive, accepting love of a parent, even when you've sequestered yourself into this incredibly cloistered, dark world of the Black Ops, no wife, won't see your children, no friends, you know, sleeping up a tree, eating tuna fish out of the can, you're sort of craving some sort of, I don't know, warm Christmas pageant style, you know.
You mentioned earlier about how the show develops throughout the season, and I mean that it's so fascinating watching you guys deal with events that are going on today. Can you talk a bit about the show's relevancy to today and the season in particular?
Yeah, I mean, it was an extraordinary thing to be making this particular show when during this particular presidential election, and have the filming of the show span probably the most unexpected election result in American history. And then feel the show and the country and the world move and shift and respond incredibly violently in the period between the election and the inauguration. That kind of very odd, lamed up window there, which was the window of our show. And I think the writers really relished the opportunity to embrace that, you know.
Mm-hmm. Take us back to the beginning of your tenure at Homeland. You came in as a guest star in the second season. I mean, did you have an inclination that you'd be sticking around for a while, or did you think it was just going to be a kind of one-off thing?
I mean, I'll tell you how little I knew. I, got the role. 2 weeks later, I was on a plane to North Carolina, and I was in a hotel room or whatever, and I was like, should I be kind of trying to find an apartment, or am I going home in 2 weeks? Like, is renting a car smart, or should I buy a car? Like, what is the deal here? And they just were like, don't know. Eventually, I was like, guys, I don't have the money to be just kind of ad hoc, living this kind of way. I was working off West End theatre, for a few £100s a week. And so there was this sense of like, I need to make some fiscal decisions. And eventually I managed to get out of them. Yeah, you're going to kill Brody. That's what you're here to do. Mm-hmm. So I was like, oh, wow, okay, that's exciting. So we did all that. And I was like, and that's it? Or am I back next season? Don't know. But then Damien won an Emmy. And so they didn't want to kill him. And then, so I then why is this guy here? And then I think they were like, well, maybe that's interesting. Why is that guy there? So it's all been very kind of, I think organic is too gentle a word, but it's been very unexpected, the development of this guy, considering that, as you say, started with this very specific guest star thing of come in and kill the main guy, and then presumably go back to whatever weird cave you came from. And to follow that all the way through to being effectively a kind of pawn in a terrorist propaganda machination. And then this season 6, which was the most incredible opportunity, I think, of my acting career, to have the privilege of exploring somebody who'd been through so much and trying to do that truthfully, which was an amazing opportunity.
And looking back on your time on the show, I don't know if I can use the word legacy yet, but I mean, just reflecting on that, how does that make you feel?
My time, or the Peter Quinn character?
Your time on the show, and I guess the Peter Quinn character as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm enormously proud to have been a part of what I consider to be one of the very best American television shows of the 21st century. I have a deep love for Quinn, and I found him to be in every way a modern, flawed, complex hero, someone who was a real man and yet not afraid of his emotions, someone who was strong and yet vulnerable, and went through, in some ways, 9 lives worth of suffering, and somehow didn't give up. There's something in that I find very inspiring. Obviously, he is someone who's paid money to kill people, and there is an ethical wobble there that we can't overlook. But if you sort of look at the man beneath the badge, that's what I found so fascinating.
And for your work, you received an Emmy nomination in your first season on the show. What did that kind of recognition mean for you?
It was so unexpected, genuinely. So much so that when my agent called to tell me that, he told me, and it was LA for him. It was sort of 6 a.m, and he said, "Sorry, man, I'm super sleepy. I misread it. Your cast has been nominated for best ensemble." So I was like, having had the champagne ready, I could have put it back. Then he phoned back 7 minutes later and went, "I'm so sorry, I've just had coffee." "No, no, you have been nominated." And so it was like, but it was amazing. You know, I'd never done television before. To be honest, I wasn't even really sure what the Emmys were. It's a bit, they were like the Grammys. They were just, you know, I'd done only theatre and film. So it was like another world full of fascinating people, but I'd just never done it. So it was really like, wow, thank you so much. Yeah, and then the Emmys is I was really glad though, because the guest star Emmy category is celebrated with all the crew Emmys.
Mhm.
And so the directors of photography and the composers, and so I got to meet all of the people who you never get to meet behind the scenes, who are mixing the sound and cutting the stuff, and that to me was really great, you know, because I get to see actors quite a lot, and to get to meet those people was way more interesting.
Yeah, those are usually the people who I interview for this site. So,
Oh, really?
yeah, I'm
Well,
with you.
they're coming up and saying, "I've been stuck looking at your face for the last 9 months," you know, and I'm like, "I'm so sorry." And then, you know, hearing their stories about what they've struggled with to make work that seems seamless to the rest of us, and you know, you never know how hard somebody's worked to make it look easy, and that's what I love about meeting people whose work I don't get to see in front of me.
Absolutely. Well, Rupert, thank you so much, and congratulations on your tenure at Homeland. It was a real pleasure talking with you.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Have a good one.